Money Gigs is supported by tryfloral.com, tryfloral.com / the money gigs to get your discount. Tryfloral produces THC beverages. They come in 2.5, 5, and 10 milligram varieties and all sorts of flavors. I have one prior to my gig, and everything is so smooth. Visit tryfloral.com / the money gigs. That's tryfloral.com / the money gigs and get your discount. Hey, welcome to the Money Gigs podcast. I'm Cliff Adams, a gigging musician and app developer out of Cincinnati, Ohio. My guest today has been playing professionally since he was 12 years old, 50 years of gigs, a 35-year career as a music educator, and he plays everything: saxophone, clarinet, flute, bass. Jan Diehl has seen this industry from every angle. I showed Jan my app. He looked at it, thought about it, and told me he'd never use it. And honestly, he's right, because Jan isn't who I built it for. I built it for the version of me in 2015. The guy who had 142 gigs that year was making $3.85 an hour on some gigs without knowing it, and was losing his family to the grind while thinking he was doing everything right. Jan at 25, living off gigs, playing 13-night weeks, he's exactly who I built it for. This conversation is honest, it's funny, and there's more wisdom in it than I expected. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. Here's Jan Diehl. You have been a part of musical productions at various schools.
I've been known as a musician for a very long time, like your dad. You know, he and I probably started out, well, we did. We started out about the same time. Then I went into music education. I was pretty successful as a jazz educator for young kids. And that got me a reputation amongst the music ed community. Essentially, in the middle of that career, I was invited to be an adjunct with the University of Mount St. Joseph and teaching clarinet and saxophone. And so during that time, I was at a Mount St. Joe faculty meeting, and they said, you know, Jan, we'd really like to start back up our jazz band here. Would you be interested in taking it? And I went, well, okay, I'll try it out. So I started it, and I'm working with college kids, and I'm trying to teach them how to improv, and none of them would stand up and take a solo. And so I was driving home one day, and I said, you know, my junior high kids could do that. And then I said the same statement a different way. You know, my junior high kids could do that. And so I started a junior high jazz group. And the whole focus of the thing was essentially, you know, playing in a band and setting it up so that the kids could stand up and take a solo. And that reputation got around with Ohio Music Ed Association, which is a music teachers group. And eventually, you know, I was invited to bring my little junior high jazz kids. Well, they weren't really junior high. Essentially, they were elementary, to Columbus. Wow. To do a presentation for the Music Ed Association. And people were blown away because, you know, I had a group of kids that were playing great, sounding great, and standing up and taking solos. And my drummer was a sixth grader. You know, most of them were sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, and they were doing it, you know, and sounding good. And, you know, just getting to do that presentation at the state convention, it's an audition process. You submit a tape, and other people decide if you're good enough to do it or not. So after that presentation, the executive director of OMEA walked up to me and put his hand on my shoulder and said, you know, Jan, I can't think of any time we've ever had a junior high group do this sort of thing. And I said, well, that's very nice of you to say, Roger, but we're in elementary school. That got me, you know, established there. So, you know, I get calls. Well, you know, Jan plays woodwinds. You know, Jan plays bass. He's pretty cool to hang out with. I think that's an important part of it.
Sometimes because I see you with a bass, and sometimes I see you with woodwinds. So what came first?
Okay, so when I was 10, I started saxophone. And when I was 12, I ran into an old jazz piano player who was the high school band director in an alley behind the school. And he goes, oh, you're digging it, ain't you? And I said, yeah, Mr. Chance, I'm digging it. Oh, I'd picked up clarinet too by then. So I was doing saxophone and clarinet because my junior high director wanted to start a stage band. And so I said, yeah, Mr. Chance, I'm digging it. And he said, well, you know, saxophone's cool, but if you want to work all the time, learn how to play bass. And I said, well, okay. And he was right, in about 3 months, I was making some money. I always had a parallel career from sixth grade on, where I would play bass guitar in rock bands, and then saxophone, clarinet, and flute was my approach to the academic side of things, And so I went to CCM as a sax player, but I paid for it by playing bass guitar 6 nights a week in bars. And it's worked out for me in the long run, because people go, well, you need a sax player. Jan Diehl plays sax.
Playing out anywhere?
Well, my wife and I had a band called Elaine and the Biscaynes for 28 years. We decided we didn't want to be up at 1 o'clock in the morning anymore, and so
Amen.
We dissolved that in 2010. Since then, we had a thing called the Jan Diehl Band, basically an original music group. So we put together 3 CDs and did pretty well with it. The best of Jan Diehl is available online on most of your downloading services. Yeah. So, that went well. We had a lot of fun with it. It was a huge success. And then Paul Bromwell developed tinnitus, and so he had to quit playing. Now we've got another trio called Boutique, and it's a Great American Songbook with Elaine singing, and I play soprano, sax, clarinet, and bass. And then we've got a keyboard player named Jim Swartout, who's a very bright player.
Of course.
That's a trio I have. And then I've got a duo with my friend Chris Goins, guitar player. So he's got his Gibson 175, and I play an acoustic bass guitar, and we do Great American Songbook jazz too. There's Cincinnati Landmark Productions, the theater company. They hire me to play, and I do, a week of rehearsals and then 4 weeks of shows, and they pay respectfully. They're nice people, and it's a great challenge. It's an interesting challenge. So I did a Frank Sinatra show with them. I did a John Denver show with them. The most recent one was they did a thing called $1 Million Quartet, which is a musical based on the night 4 big dudes were in the studio one night in Sun Records down there in Memphis.
Oh, God.
So the whole musical is a story around that. I played Carl Perkins' little brother. I was considered an actor. The whole cast and the director, they were all around 30. And we started rehearsals, and the director was standing in front of me with his hand on his chin, and thinking, and he goes, "It seems like you know these songs." Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do, But, it was fun. I had a great time with it. It was a month of sold out shows for them, so they were happy.
What do you want to accomplish now musically? What do you endeavor to aspire to?
See, I retired in 2020. I snuck out the back door during COVID from teaching. From that period on, from 2020 on, I did long-term subbing as a music educator in various schools. I taught orchestra at Marymount. I taught jazz at Walnut Hills. I taught music technology at Oak Hills. And I taught orchestra and band at Delhi Junior High. And then finally, I decided, beginning of this school year, that I just let my license expire. That way I knew I couldn't get a call and I couldn't accept it. So since then, my goal is just to be a musician. I still do some guest things, like I teach a jazz class every now and then at McNick and also at Elder, and then I do guest conducting, honor bands, that sort of thing. But I'm not an educator anymore. So I'm just working on the music thing.
Cool. Do you have any, I get this question a lot myself. People ask me, have you done anything original? Like, have I written anything? And frankly, I haven't. I've like one song that I've made that is out there in a salsa album.
Oh, that's
Do you
cool.
have that aspiration?
No, when I was a young man, and when we were first doing Elaine and the Biscaynes, we were just throwing the original music in with the cover band stuff that we were doing because we were making money. That was our living at the time, or at least it was mine. I had taken a hiatus from teaching. Then I was offered the Guardian Angels job, and figured out that I could gig and teach. And I did that for a while and wrote a few things in those days, but I've very quickly figured out that I'm not that kind of creative. I'm pretty good at co-authoring, so to speak, but Paul Bromwell and I worked together, but I never did contributed enough that I felt like I was a songwriter. He has this brilliant melodic mind that doesn't happen very often, and so we let him do his thing. Elaine wrote some things with him where she was contributing lyrics and also some of the melody lines. But no, I'm the accompanist, not the.
That's actually very centering, because it seems like you're like completely at peace with that. But I think it's because out of this conversation so far, what I'm getting is you're a teacher, and you have been. I wonder if I invited you to my gig. Like I play solo keyboard at a couple restaurants during the week, 6 to 9,
Okay.
Tuesday, Thursday. I wonder if I sat you down next to me and said, hey, you cover the bass. And I bet at the end of an hour or two, I bet you would have 3 to 5, I don't know, maybe 50 points of insight that you might be able to infer.
Well, that's something I've tried to learn how to turn off over the years. So, there are points in time when you can share things like that. And there are people who have personality traits that you can share that kind of stuff with. But for the most part, it's best just to show up and do your job and keep your mouth shut and do it. No, I figured out very quickly that I was a teacher very young. That same jazz piano player, I met him in the alley again. And he said, so you still digging it? And I go, yeah. And he goes, so now that you're playing bass and sax, what do you think about doing? And in those days, you could hypothetically work real. I said, I think I'll work real hard and be a musician and just play gigs and maybe I'll get good enough I can do some sessions. And he said, well, that's cool, man. He said, but eventually you probably have a family. You want to get that teaching degree. And I went, well, okay, so, which is kind of where I was as a kid. And then I started a little private teaching studio when I was 14. Yeah, well, actually, I taught a few people when I was 12. But when I was 14, I actually had a studio kind of thing going. Started teaching at that age and figured out that I was okay at doing that. I can do it. Looking out on sort of the gigging landscape, like the world as we know it, you think about the world today and what gigging musicians are doing. What would you tell? Let's really hone in on that teaching thing you do. What would you tell other gigging musicians? Challenges you see, mistakes you see made. What goes on in your head when I say that? Well, I've been gigging since I was 12. So there are things that I do that I don't even think of anymore. But the biggest thing is I'm an hour before kind of guy. So if you book me for a 7 o'clock gig, I'm probably there at 6 and getting everything ready and putting it together. I try to be friendly and I try to be nice. And there are so many musicians who think that it's all about them. And it's really not. It's all about, however you develop a relationship with whoever you're working with, and so I try to make things happen. So somebody goes, oh man, I don't know, I don't have this cable, or my cable died. And I go, give me a minute. And I go out to my car and I pull a cable out and I said, I think this one will work for you. And they go, well, why do you have that? I go, well, a lot of people don't think of gigs as relationships. They really don't. Yeah, I didn't. And that's something I'm running into, and I'm kicking myself because I get to look over 32 years of playing. Mm-hmm. And I was extremely focused on me. And part of that was getting to the gig and making sure there's this internal thing of always wanting to prove yourself, and make sure the product's there. You don't want to offend someone. You don't want to mess up the songs. So you're hyper focused on the product that you're creating. It has always been about the people. There's a cap on how much your product means on a gig. And I think it's probably exponential when you start talking about relating to people, being friendly and being nice. You talked about getting there at 6 if it's 7. I got to tell you, I leave really early for gigs now because I have to lift stuff. But for me, it's about getting centered to do something creative after you've done something hyper practical. So you just got through traffic, you found parking, you set up your stuff. That is not the energy that my music benefits from. I hear you, man. Yeah. Oh, I hear you. So, you do have to sit down and focus yourself. And, I could particularly see how you as a solo piano player would struggle with things, and you as a solo piano player, and I have no idea because I haven't heard you play. And I'm thinking of one gal that I went to college with. She walk in at the last minute and wonder why people aren't happy about her. If you showed up a half hour early, said hi to people, talked a little bit, because people are people. They're not going to judge you on whether or not you got that German six chord in there or not. They don't know about that. They're judging you on your personality and how you do things.
So when you're on a gig, when you've been on a gig before, and you said you started gigging when you were 12, was it always sort of natural instinct, say on breaks, to go out and talk to people and mix and mingle and stuff?
I don't know. I guess I've always been friendly with folks, but there was a booking agent that I worked with when I was a teenager, and we used to quote him, "People like a friendly band," and that's what it's all about, So. Yeah, you talk with folks, you don't ignore them. They want to know you. They want to be able to go home to their friends and say, "Oh yeah, I know Jan Diehl." Yeah.
I want to let you go, but a couple things. Any venues that you've played in the past where you would regard them as challenging?
Oh yeah, any venue where people talk louder than the music is challenging.
That is a thing. Can you recall any time where you played a venue and didn't go back?
Let me think about that. Well, there were a couple places in the 80s that the Biscaynes didn't go back to a couple places, but they're non-existent, and probably for good reason.
Was that because of the crowd or because of the venue?
Yes. It was just an atmosphere thing. Mm-hmm. It just didn't seem right. And, Elaine she was essentially the boss of the thing. She's my wife, and she was the leader of the band. And I made sure the technology went well and got all that stuff going. So at the end of the night, I'd be, tearing down stuff and loading up the truck, and she would be at the bar dealing with the owner, getting paid. So there were a couple of owners who were not necessarily respectful of a woman band leader. Those we didn't go back to.
I sense you're putting that delicately.
Yes, I am. And then she had a couple that just simply couldn't respect a woman having to do business with a woman. She's a hard ass, man. Especially when we first started, she was fresh out of college. We didn't do wedding receptions per se, but every now and then we'd be hired. We'll do the wedding reception, but we're Elaine and the Biscaynes. We're not a wedding reception band. And so we got hired by one. And I'll never forget this one. At the end of the gig, Elaine went up to the mom, and it's explicitly said in the contract, check due at the end of the gig, And the mom goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I forgot my checkbook." And Elaine turned to her and said, "Well, that's fine. We're all packed up. We can follow you home."
Nice.
We can take care of that. Not a problem.
That's fantastic.
So,
you got paid.
Yeah, hell yeah, we got paid. I don't base my acceptance or rejection of gigs on how much money I make or any of that other stuff. My whole goal as a musician is, am I going to be challenged as a musician? And am I going to have a good time with the musicians I'm working with? And that's all I care about. That's it. So, I'm fortunate that I make pretty good money because people call me for things. But this is not a business for me. Mm-hmm. I don't approach it from a business point of view. I'm not of that mentality. I'm sure many people are, but if a guy calls me up and says, "Hey man, all I can do is give you gas money, but can you sit in with this big band?" Well, hell yeah, I'll sit in with the big band. Mm-hmm. And I've sat in with a big band for $25 before because it's a musical challenge, and I don't get to play big band music like that all the time.
The actual musical challenge, I can get that. Were you ever in that kind of position where music, you needed to make rent with what you were making?
Yeah. Oh yeah. When Elaine and the Biscaynes started out, I took a 6-year hiatus from teaching. It wasn't a plan to be a 6-year hiatus. It just ended up being a 6-year hiatus. But yeah, I was living off the gig scene. The Biscaynes worked a lot. We figured the end of a week is when we had a night off, and we played some 13-night weeks, man. But that's the way the scene was. That was the end of the regular gigging scene as I knew it, the whole 70s and 80s, I guess about up to about 80, 88, mm-hmm. 89. But 81 to 87, I was playing music, and I was working for a production company, a sound and lighting company, part-time in the daytime.
That's how you were making bread on the side.
the music was the living, really. I mean, the other stuff was just, I got free time in the daytime. Why didn't I make money?
It's interesting because you've kind of been in that educational realm. And the other day I had someone post something like, I play for free because I enjoy playing. And I might be missing something. That's one thing I know, like turning the 50 corner. I think I say that more often than I did prior to my 50s. But when he says something like that, I think about how much debt I was in after going to UC for jazz up until I was in my mid 40s. I think I was still in several thousands in debt, and I'm still now because I paid for my kids' college on loans. And I'm thinking, someone taking gigs for, I'm going to say, exposure, or because they're rich. Let's say they're a doctor, lawyer, they've got so they don't really need the money. But when they go and they take a gig and they say, you don't need to pay me. I wonder how that impacts.
Oh, I don't ever do that.
Oh, okay.
But
right.
if a friend calls me and says, look, this gig, it won't pay much, but if you'd like to play it, I'd love to have you. And if it's a good enough friend and I know the music's going to be fun, that's what I do.
So I've done the same thing very recently. A friend called and he said, Cliff, we have a Sublime cover band. And I was like, you are not hiring the right guy for this, clearly, but okay. And I took it, and I have a 3-strike rule of, if I've played 3 gigs for you and it hasn't paid and I've put in X number of hours, I'm done. And where that generally comes from is in 2015, I had 142 gigs that year. I had 104 the following year. And at one point, I lost my IT job. And in order to replace that salary, I decided to Uber drive. In the month of June 2015, July and August, I was Cincinnati's #1 Uber driver. But as I was doing that, I was also gigging, and I wasn't seeing my family. And it was really challenging. And I realized that I had not spent a moment of time getting educated on this thing that was now causing me to make money. It was just, I got in my car, and from the moment I pointed my car out of my driveway, I was on the clock. And I then was running a band, I was doing gigs, and I started to apply that same philosophy to my bands. And so I built this little calculator in a spreadsheet, and I discovered that I was making $3.85 an hour for one group. And the gigs that were paying the most was when Jim Connerly subbed me out at Jeff Ruby's for 2 hours, because I didn't need to rehearse. The drive time was 10 minutes from my house. So I thought, it's not that I'm going to turn down opportunities when friends call, but I am going to seek out those opportunities that meet that goal, so that I still have opportunities to accept those other things without it impacting the rest of my domestic life, which it did. I was too involved trying to play. I was thinking, I've got this IT job, I'm also doing this band thing, and I'm going out, I'm making the bread, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. So that was, that all that is kind of why I'm creating this tool. It's not that I'm telling you don't take gigs. What I'm saying is, be aware when you do take a gig, especially if you're prolific, if you're doing 100, 140, something like that, be aware.
No, I mean, I'm always aware of what income's coming in. That's not it at all. It's just that I'm not business oriented. I'm into the music for the music.
Mm-hmm.
I took a gig in Batesville, and took 2 gigs in Batesville, Indiana. 2 gigs, same night, 2 different venues on the same property. The pay was good, but not once did I sit down and calculate how long the mileage was, all that other kind of stuff. I don't care.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Gotcha. No, it's okay. You're in that position. That's the thing. I think part of what I'm understanding is when you create a product, you have to identify the niche you're going for, the actual person. And you might not be, and that's not the case. But what I'm definitely going for with the podcast and what we've talked about today is, how can I otherwise benefit musicians and the gigging musician community? And so I think we've done a lot of that today. We're about 10 minutes over, and I want to respect your time. We need to meet up someplace.
I'll tell you what, send me your email address. I send out email flyers of what I'm doing, and you can pick something you like.
Awesome. Okay, man, I'll let you go. Thanks for talking with me. I'm sorry it took me 30 years to meet you. Appreciate it.
Talk to you about it.
That was Jan Diehl, 50 years in, still gigging, still showing up an hour early, still pulling cables out of his car for whoever needs one. The thing that stuck with me most from this conversation is something he said almost in passing, that he doesn't think of gigs as transactions, he thinks of them as relationships. And I think that's something most of us know, but forget the moment we start worrying about the money, which is exactly why the money part matters. Because when you know your numbers, you stop resenting the gig. You can show up like Jan shows up, present, generous, an hour early, instead of doing mental math all night about whether it was worth the drive. That's what the Money Gigs app is built for. It's free to download on iOS and Android. Just search Money Gigs wherever you get your apps. There's also a venue map where musicians rate and review gigging venues anonymously. But here's the thing, that only works if musicians are in it. So if you download it and if you've played out, go add your venues. Be the person who helps the next musician decide if that gig is worth the drive. That's the whole idea. If this episode gave you something, share it with one musician who needs to hear it. That's how this show grows. I'm Cliff Adams. Go get your Money Gigs.